We're going to talk about how to make any martial art work. Yes, even Aikido. There are really only three things that you need to do to make any martial art work. Any martial art that is available to you, anything. So let's back up for a minute. I often recommend to people that they train what is available to them, even if it's not what they're looking for. Because despite the fact that so many people believe that you should just pick up your entire life and go study with some famed grandmaster somewhere, it is extremely unlikely that the average person is going to move their entire life to go chase down a certain martial art or a certain school or a certain teacher. And you have to be able to make the things work that are available to you. This is how human history has worked. People make things with the resources that are available to them. And I'm absolutely convinced that being a good student is far superior to finding the best teacher. Being a good student, of course, requires you to be a bit of a Sherlock Holmes, right? And being selective about what you learn and having the right deductive and inductive skills to figure out where you need to kind of make adjustments and go off book and all that. So I will say this, there are going to be some schools that are extraordinarily restrictive. If you don't have anything but that available to you, you're probably going to have to make do on your own or find somebody completely unaffiliated with that school to work with you on the side, though you still may learn some stuff at that restricted school. It's hard to recommend a school or a teacher that is overly restrictive, overly dogmatic, but there are ways to work through and around that. You just have to be extra careful on who you trust and who you talk to about things, because obviously if you're going extracurricular on things, you don't want to jeopardize your tenure at that school because your teacher doesn't like you going to seminars or doesn't like you training on the side. And again, ideally avoid those places, but if you have nothing else available to you, you might still be able to go and learn something. So, number one, you need to identify the context of what it is that you are training. Every art was built around a certain context, some of them more historical than others, some of them much more modern, some of them sport-oriented, some of them self-defense oriented, some of them combatives oriented. We're using combatives as a general term, for the stuff that you would generally look at as like military domain, taking out hostiles and stuff. And for the most part, a lot of that is weapons stuff, but let's be fair, sometimes within the weapon stuff, you have to resort to things like grappling and at least some striking. You're just not getting into a boxing match, and that does matter. So identifying the context for what your training is going to be extraordinarily important, because there are two things here. No art is designed to defeat itself. Every single art is designed to defeat somebody that is already existing and rivaling it, right? Why do people innovate different martial arts? Because they need something that fits them as an individual better and something that can tactically get the advantage over somebody else who is challenging them. Now, that can be within a certain family of disciplines or within a certain sporting context that is somewhat standardized, like, say, boxing. How many styles of boxing are there? Loads, right? Country, regional ones, certain gyms, certain coaches have certain styles, right? Because the style is how you express the art. The art itself is the categorical family of tactics that you're playing with. So identifying the context is incredibly important. The other thing is that tactics and techniques very seldomly apply outside of at least their broad context. Some things fit into a very narrow context. Some things do fit into a broader context, right? More generic punches, kicks, holds, and throws, like you see kind of across the broad spectrum of martial arts, are going to be fairly universal. Now, as to what's appropriate for what context, that's another story. But as far as like tactical applicability, as far as mechanical applicability goes, Some things are going to have a more narrow focus. Some things are going to have a broader focus. And you probably should be basing your training initially off of the broader focus stuff and become more narrow as you identify your personal specific context. But again, let's not go too far on this. The next thing that we have to look at, and this is the most critical one, is that you need to use pressure and aliveness. Now, obviously, this means sparring, but it doesn't only mean sparring. It means that you need training games that are somewhere between a static drill and sparring. It means that you need things that have variables that force you to have to use your OODA loop, right? That force you to read, make a decision, and act, and then deal with the consequences of those actions. And you have to have varying levels of intensity, right? Because if you never have the pressure of somebody trying to take your head off, you're not going to be prepared for that. If you never have the intensity of somebody being extraordinarily subtle and tricky, you're not going to be prepared for that. So there has to be, for this idea of pressure and aliveness, there has to be a certain level of human variability in there, where basically everybody involved in it is a free agent to, even within a certain limited paradigm, is free to act, right? So if you're dealing with responses to straight punches, when you get to pressure testing or being more alive with that, you don't necessarily have to go straight to boxing. You can actually go to something like move around like you're sparring. The feeder can throw straight punches, but they can throw straight punches in any format they want, like a boxer, like a karate guy, like a kung fu guy. Like, you know, they can flicker them, they can throw them perfectly straight, they can go no telegraph, they can go high telegraph, they can throw wide straights with that kind of, you know, that big elbow lift first. And so there's a range of variability, and then they get to determine the timing. They get to determine if they're throwing things in sequence or you know, in series, or if they're throwing them singularly. They get to determine like angle and range. They get to determine intensity. They get to determine left and right. That kind of thing is really important, right? And that is a really good way to play with responding to straight punches, because you introduce all of this chaotic variability, and the person on the receiving end that has to deal with that has to make choices based not on the wide array of punches, but perhaps on a smaller array of, is it left, is it right, is it wide, is it narrow, is it telegraphed, is it not telegraphed, that kind of stuff. And so it still forces them into a bit of an OODA loop where they have to observe, orient, decide, and act. But it keeps the stress level low, the decision making simpler, so that they can develop a response. And over time, you can build that into the fuller boxing platform. And you can do this for each strike, you can do this for holds, you can do this for hand fencing, hand fighting. You can obviously do this for grappling, you can do this for pins and ground positions. You can do this with everything, right? You can take the idea of some of these static drills, and now look, I still think static drills can be useful, but it is important to have pressure and aliveness. And that pressure and aliveness doesn't only mean go from static drill to free sparring. There's a huge chasm between those things. So find those intermediary things, little training games that force you into some problem solving before you go full sparring. And I think you'll find some better success with that kind of thing. So again, identify your context and then use pressure and aliveness. And again, if your school, if your instructor doesn't want to do that in-house, then you're probably going to have to recruit a friend or two. I suggest at least 2 people aside from yourself, because that way you can at least have one person on the outside monitoring and giving feedback. But that's a discussion for another time, and I have talked about that before. All right, and then the last thing is add, subtract, innovate, improvise. This is very similar to Ed Parker's theory of like sentence diagramming with the techniques, right? Ed Parker would do these big padded out combinations, But then the idea was over time you do it like diagramming a sentence, right? And then you can add and you can subtract and you can add a prefix, add a suffix. The idea is that you could actually build on the idea, so you have the formal baseline standard, and then it is up to you to go, can I substitute a new technique for this technique, right? Are these things within the same wheelhouse? Do they address this problem that I'm facing? And if so, how does it change how the rest of it flows? And that's a pretty cool idea, right? And so adding and subtracting could mean anything from supplementing with another art, because if you're in a very restrictive art, one that is either restrictive due to sport context or restrictive due to historical context, then you're going to need additions and subtractions to make things work within other contexts, because again, things do not always translate across contexts. And then you might have to just come up with some innovations and improvisements, right? Innovations being, let's just say, creating something new. This does not mean that you've invented something, because there's a good chance that it's already been done. But the idea is discovering for yourself some kind of novel way for you to execute something so that it works better. And that can be that can be done a lot of ways. And then improvising, right? And improvising really is kind of similar, except innovation is a little bit more permanent, whereas improvising is just kind of off the cuff, doing something because it fits, right? And you got to think like a jazz musician in that sense of like, I know what key I'm in, I know what mode I'm playing, I know the scales, and I can just, I'm going to input this in, and that was spicy, but who cares, because I'm just transitioning and keep on going, right? Improvising is an extraordinarily powerful part of all of this, right? And again, if it works, it's not wrong. So the thing is that you can make any martial art work as long as you can identify the context that it's designed for, as long as you can pressure test and use aliveness and do sparring and training games and cause some off-the-cuff problem solving. And then, of course, making additions and subtractions where you need to, innovating where you need to, improvising where you need to, and creating something that is a little more customized to you and your context. Now, like I said, if you are in a very restrictive school or under a very restrictive coach who wants you to be extraordinarily loyal to them, my first thing is, can you find another one? Second off is, if you're stuck that way, because I do advocate that you train what is available to you, then I suggest that you find a training partner or two off to the side. And if your school, your instructor doesn't like that, just shut up and train, and don't post it on social media, and don't do stuff, and just don't jeopardize the future of your training, at least until you can improve the situation, right? But find a friend or two, ideally two and more, right? If you can get a little training group off to the side of a handful of guys, that's great. And keep it casual and flowing, and you will find a world of value in that. But I guarantee you can make any martial art work if you understand all of this stuff. And again, keep in mind, right? And I didn't write this down on the board, but no martial art was designed to defeat itself. You need to be training your art against other kinds of pressures. If you're a grappling art, train against striking. If you're a punching art, train against kicking and grappling, right? If you're, obviously, if you're a kicking art, you're probably still doing punching, but, let's just say you're a Taekwondo guy who has really bad hands, train some boxing, right? Like, train with things that you, and against things that your art is not necessarily good at doing, but might have to engage against, right? So your context is important, but it's also important for you to experience training against others, because your art was not designed as a self-contained, self-sustained system of we only fight ourselves. That's ridiculous, and that is not what martial arts are for. They are for fighting the outside pressures from other people who are engaged in fighting arts from a variety of scenarios. And if you find what you're doing just does not match the context that you're looking for, then you're going to have to do some really, really heavy adding, subtracting, innovating, improvising, or flat out switching to something else. But that's another story, right? I truly believe that you can make almost anything work if you can identify these factors and you are training a live versus a multiplicity of pressures. All right, I'm going to get out of here and I will talk to you guys later. Good journey. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share. Check us out on our other socials, and please head over to blacksunboxing.com to get a little more info, including how to contact us. Furthermore, if you are in the Phoenix area, please feel free to stop in, say hi, join in for a class, whatever. Also, if you ever see us cite sources or just for additional content, please check out our Substack. That is where we put all of the sources we use in our videos and is a major part of this. Plus, it serves as a membership platform for long distance learning and for people who would like to support us but aren't local. We would greatly appreciate it if you signed up. Even just the free membership helps us out a lot. All right, I will see you guys in the next video. Good journey.